Cooper on the Case. A Masonic Authors Guild International production.
What is a Cowan? Welcome to another episode of Cooper on the Case. The other day I happened to dip into Black's The Surnames of Scotland to check on something relating to my family name. Dr. George F. Black's Surnames of Scotland, Their Origin, Meaning and History, was first published in 1946 by the New York Public Library. My copy was published in 1993 in Edinburgh. When I opened the book, it did so at a page containing the details for the surname Cowan. Of course, I read the entry because, as a Freemason, I was well aware that most Masonic rituals contain one or more references to a Cowan. This is always in the form of a warning, such as, quote, "It is the sworn duty of the Tyler to keep off all Cowans and eavesdroppers," close quote. Black's observations on the surname Cowan were as follows. Quote, 1. The name is explained to come from Scots Cowan, a dry stone diker, but I doubt this explanation. 2. It may be a corruption of Cahoon, the common pronunciation of which is Cohoon. Mr. Alexander Cowan of Beeslack is said to have left on record many of his grandfather's books which bore the name Cahoon. 3. There was an old family of Cowan in Stirling. Cowan's Hospital was founded in 1639 by John Cowan, a merchant there, for the support of 12 decayed guild brethren. Dr. Black offers 3 possible sources for the name Cowan. First, the occupation of dry stone diker, that is, someone who builds walls from loose and uncut stones. These are usually boundary walls marking out property boundaries, fields, pastures and enclosures for animals. In Scotland, these are instead of hedges or fences commonly found elsewhere. His second explanation is that the name Cowan is a corruption of Cahoon, pronounced Cohoon, which is audibly like Cowan, and he found some examples supporting this view. His third and last explanation is probably the most credible, and that is because he found several examples of people who had that surname as early as the 16th and 17th centuries. One was a merchant in Stirling by the name of Cowan who established a hospital, a form of home and medical facility for old guild brethren. This may have some significance, and I shall return to this possibility later. The question that came to mind, how came it to be that an ordinary Scottish surname ended up as a pejorative term for an eavesdropper within Masonic ritual? Let me emphasise the point that this far we have discussed Cowan as a surname, and a brief thought that it might have an occupational connection, but I remembered that the word Cowan appeared in some early Scottish documents, and I re-examined them to be sure that my memory was accurate. In 1598, William Shaw, born approximately 1550 and died in 1602, Maester o' Work sent what are now known as the first Shaw statutes to every lodge in Scotland. These statutes were a set of instructions as to how lodges were to conduct their affairs. There is a huge amount that could be said about Shaw and his statutes, but I must leave that for another time. The instruction I wish to discuss is as follows, quote, item, and it's item 14, that no master or fellow of craft is to associate with any Cowans, nor will any of their servants, that is, labourers and other workmen, are to work with Cowans under the pain of a fine of £20 for each occasion of breaking of this rule. Close quote. Here I thought was a conundrum. We know from Black's work that people by the surname Cowan were alive and active at this time. Surely this instruction to lodges was not telling Masons not to associate with people of that name. It clearly referred to something else. It was not something symbolic or esoteric, despite some people trying to make it such. That something else had to be human, for the instruction to Masons is to stop them working with Cowans. Shaw would have been well aware that there were families with the name Cowan. What caused him to use that word to indicate someone with whom Masons should not associate in an occupational capacity? I do not think he would have plucked the word out of thin air. I would argue that Shaw used it because it was already in common use, and people understood that it applied to a particular group of people, and not individuals or families with that name. Apart from the statutes, where else might the word have been used, and to whom was it referring? Fortunately, there were lots of places to look. First, I knew that Shaw had been appointed as Master of Works in 1583, and that the Masters of Works had kept separate financial accounts, and that was my first port of call. Fortunately, these had been published, albeit a long time ago, in 1948, and cover the period from 1529 to 1615. This covered the entire period that William Shaw was Master of Works. Nowhere in the accounts does the word Cowan appear. There are numerous references to workmen, labourers and servants who worked for Masons, but Cowans are never mentioned. Where next? Fortunately, the lodges in Scotland began to keep written records from 1599, as instructed by Shaw in his statutes. I therefore turned to these early minutes and immediately struck gold. The first minute of the Lodge of Edinburgh, now known as the Lodge of Edinburgh Mary's Chapel No. 1, is dated 31st of July 1599. This is a record of an unusual meeting of the Lodge. One of its members had been accused of employing a Cowan, and the minute recorded that he admitted to that offence. The Lodge decided that he would not be punished, but everyone was warned that any further offenders would be. Perhaps this was a test case precipitated by Shaw's statutes. In any event, working with a Cowan was offence, and it was now on record, and no one could plead ignorance in the future. Exactly why was working with a Cowan considered an offence against the Lodge, and therefore the entire craft of stonemasonry? There seems to have been a combination of factors. A dry stone diker is not an unskilled occupation. Some of the walls they built are still standing after 1,000 years, but it was not the same work as that of a stonemason. Masons appear to have viewed these dry stone wallers as inferiors because they didn't shape stone but used it in its raw form. Their skill came from their ability to interlock various sizes and shapes of stone to build a strong and very durable wall. Their use of tools was minimal, and knowledge of geometry was unnecessary. They also lived outside towns, as their work was almost entirely in rural areas, and therefore could not have lodges in the style of stonemasons who lived and worked inside urban areas, that is, towns. This meant that they could not be initiated in a lodge, and so suffered a double whammy, not having the mason's word. Perhaps there was an element of fear that a skilled worker in stone would dilute the stonemason's monopoly of building with stone. However, we must also consider the possible motives of William Shaw, as he used the word Cowan and instructs all the Masons of Scotland, via their lodges, not to work with Cowans, and that if they did, they would be punished. It is possible that he was a genuinely good man who was in a position to help Masons to protect themselves from competition and therefore secure their livelihoods. But I think there was more to it than that, although that could have been a factor. After examining the Master of Works accounts, that shows that accounts can be of value. Shaw had no interest in other trades involving the erection of buildings, such as carpenters, glaziers, locksmiths, and all the others. Only to the stonemasons did he devote considerable time and energy in guiding and instructing them. The word Cowan was used to describe those who were not stonemasons and who were not members of a lodge. That was for internal lodge use, and became a general word amongst Masons for outsiders, non-Masons, particularly those who were suspected of trying to learn the so-called secrets without being entitled to them. Why is the use of an obscure Scottish word or name important for those interested in researching Freemasonry, be they academic or popular historians? Simply put, tracing the origin of even a single word, in this case Cowan, has helped to reveal the origins of modern-day Masonic ritual by tracing it back to the very late 16th century Scotland. And that's what Cooper on the Case is all about, trying to track down original references to provide a better understanding of the history of Freemasonry. Please listen in again for another Cooper on the Case.
Cooper on the Case.